So having no stress means we're not really living. Like we're not engaging in the gifts of life, which are inevitably have some challenge and risk. And let me give you an example. One study took elderly people who were retired, and they, society kind of labels them as you're kind of done with your meaningful work in life, and you are pretty much not able to contribute to society. I mean, there's so many negative stereotypes that people then kind of embody and then live. And this program brought them to work in schools and tutor young at-risk students. And what happened to them is they went from feeling maybe safe and under stressed to feeling challenged, but generative. They were feeling more purpose. They were feeling like they were growing, and they were feeling like their day had more meaning. They had more relationships. They had these caring relationships with the students. The students had all sorts of issues and troubles, drugs and maybe not having lunch, poverty. And so they felt the stress of that. But they also saw how much they could help with their support and their tutoring. And in this study, they took images of the hippocampus, and those who engaged in the program, particularly the men, actually had growth of their hippocampus during this program. So at any stage in life, we can be growing and challenging ourselves, even in our much later years, and growing our brain. And you know more than anyone, like, what does that hippocampal growth mean for their well-being and their cognitive functioning?
Yeah, it's interesting that hippocampus, of course, a brain area involved in formation and recall of memories, mostly formation of memories. It's super interesting because it's so plastic. It's so amenable to the addition of new memories. I think the most striking study to me is the one, and I should point out that most of the data say that the addition of new neurons is not the main reason for improvements in memory, but it is one of them. But Rusty Gage down at the Salk Institute did a study in the early 2000s where they took terminally ill people, and these people agreed to have their bodies injected with a dye that would label new neurons. And then after they died, their brains were processed, and they didn't die from the dye injection, by the way, folks. They died from other causes. They were terminally ill. And what they discovered was that even in terminally ill and some of these people were quite old, those people were still generating new neurons, especially in the context of still trying to learn and acquire new information. So, of course, they're dead, so they can't apply that information after that. But of course, none of us can, right? None of the information that.
Yeah, but why not up to when you die, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
So one other example of this, my colleague Dave Almeida, he measures, daily stressful events in huge national populations, and a small percentage of people report no stressors. And so you wonder, like, what's happening? Are they not engaging in life? Are they really not having stressors? It looks like they are. It's not just that they're not getting stressed by things. They're not really going out and doing much. And what he found is that their level of kind of memory and cognition, their cognitive health was significantly lower. So you can imagine the hippocampal, the lack of those neuroprogenitor cells. They're just not being stimulated.
It's super interesting. I wasn't aware of that result, so I appreciate you sharing it. I almost have to wonder if it's like exercise where, so many people, I think now everybody hopefully understands that exercise is going to lower blood pressure, reduce resting heart rate, improve musculoskeletal function and bone density, all that stuff. But that if you took a snapshot of the bodily response during exercise, blood pressure is way, way up. Heart rate is way, way up. Stress hormones are way up. Cortisol is through the roof during a hard workout and immediately afterwards. And yet that sets in motion a series of adaptations that brings you to a better place most of the time. I almost wonder if stress is the same. Is there any evidence that short bouts of stress, provided that they're managed well, meaning that we don't spend the next 24 or 48 hours ruminating on the stressor, but that we're able to move through the stressor and resolve it in some way, that's actually beneficial for us because of the mobilization of energy stores and maybe even changing our threshold for reacting to stressors in the future?
It's a great question. And it's one that I have been chewing on for a while, because we know, as you said, that physical stressors, when they're short and repeated, like high intensity interval training, they are promoting not just aerobic fitness, but stress fitness. People feel less rumination, less depression, less anxiety. So they're kind of tuning up the nervous system. What about psychological stressors? And we know two things. So one is, I do think that there is a level of engagement with moderate stressors that when we are used to them, we get fit and our stress resilience builds, meaning we're less threatened by them. So let me go deep into that. Two people can approach the exact same stressor, and one person is having a pretty overreactive stress response where they basically are feeling their survival is threatened. So it's high cortisol, high vasoconstriction, and blood pressure goes up equally in both. But the person who's feeling super threatened, either their survival or their social survival, their ego, their blood pressure went up because of the vasoconstriction. The other person who is viewing the same stressor as, I can do this. This is a great challenge and opportunity. I have what it takes. Those types of thoughts generate a different hemodynamic response, which is actually more cardiac output. So blood pressure is going up, but in this healthier way, more oxygenation to the brain, better problem solving. They're able to maintain this positive outlook. So we've measured this threat challenge response in many lab studies, and we know lots of things. So if you're having more of the challenge response, at the end of it, you're less inflamed. So just in the lab, within an hour or two, we see that they didn't trigger all that pro-inflammatory response. And their telomeres tend to be longer, which is a measure we can talk more about. But basically, it looks like they have a slower speed of aging.
That is super interesting. You call this a stress challenge response?
So we could call this kind of a, to be really simplistic, two types of psychological stress response: feeling threatened, like you're going to fail, you're embarrassed. That social pain response we know well, that feels terrible. But that huge stress response when we feel it in our stomach, our heart is pounding. It's just an over-exaggerated response. That response biologically is different, and the thoughts that go with it are different, and we recover a lot slower. And then there's the challenge response, which is it's more of that kind of activated, excited response. And the beauty is that there are lots of studies out there done by emotions and social psychologists that tilt people toward the challenge response. We can actually promote that challenge response. And so when you asked about, like, is it good to have a repeated stress response? Yes, if it's manageable, right? Then we're kind of building the muscle of stress resilience.